Hi everyone, Tom Loria here. Welcome to the shop. Today's video is going to be a continuation of our discussion about scale appearance and trying to create a compelling impression of an actual vessel. One of the places where models tend to fall down a little bit is in the rigging details and in the blocks in particular. Most guys, if you're building from a kit, you kind of make the assumption that the kit manufacturer has done his homework and has sized the blocks in your kit to sizes that would be appropriate for the model, for the period, and for the particular scale that you're working in. That's not always the case. They have to make compromises here and there so that they can produce these things without them costing $1,000 a piece. I know some kits do actually cost that much, but most of them don't, and the manufacturers try their best to keep the costs down, and one of the ways they do it is by sort of generalizing on some of the fittings, some of the appearances of some of the fittings. So we're going to look today at blocks that are actually commercially available, and they're commercially available through two of the what I consider the better kit manufacturers, Blue Jacket, Shipcrafters up in Searsport, Maine, and Siren Models in Connecticut. And I've cited both of these guys before, and I've put links on my previous video to their websites, so you can reach them, or you can just Google them and they'll come up right away. But I did have links on the last video, and you can go back there and check them out if you like. So today what we're going to do is we're going to take these blocks, which start out looking pretty good and only need that little bit of tweaking that I mentioned earlier, and we're going to do this with a minimum of tools. I know that ship model guys and woodworking guys and gearheads are all tend to be tool junkies, and I'm one myself. But that's not what the focus is today. We're going to do everything to modify these blocks and to make whatever we need with very little in the way of tooling. We're going to use a Dremel just because it's easier and faster, and we're going to use 3 bits. One is a little sanding disc. Another is a drill bit. And the third is a buffing wheel, but it's not a soft buffing wheel, it's a coarse buffing wheel, and it puts a nice finish on these Britannia blocks from Blue Jacket. So after you've altered them, if you want to get rid of the sanding scratches or something like that, you just buff them with that, and you'll see me doing that. That's it. Even if you don't have a Dremel and you don't have these, you will need the drill bit. But if you don't have a Dremel, you can do everything with a nail file. The only specialized piece that you're going to need, and actually you're not even going to need this if the model you're making does not use shackles, but if it does use shackles, this is a handy little tool to have if you're going to be making shackles. And I'll have a close-up shot of this. And what this is just a pair of needle nose pliers that I altered to have a post, a round post, that's in this case 15, almost 16 thousandths in diameter. And these jaws over here were altered to have a triangular shape that meet that post, just like that. And you'll see these in a close-up photograph that I'll include in the video. But these things are indispensable. So today, like I said, we're going to be making those tweaks on the commercially available blocks, and I'll also show you how to make a shackle, which could seem like a daunting task, and your first couple attempts probably will be pretty daunting. But if you get it down, it's really, you do it automatically after a while. It's really not that difficult. So, without further ado, And without further verbiage, let's get into the shop and start making stuff. So these are the blocks we'll be using in today's video, and they're typical of what you might find on a vessel from the latter part of the 19th century. And you can see the tweaks I've made, as well as the paint job. The two in the foreground will really not be part of the demo today, but I will be using the two in the upper right. Now the darker one has had its walls thinned down to be more in scale, and the groove running the full length of the body has been reduced to the top and bottom thirds, and the sheave holes have been chamfered to allow the rigging line to enter and exit the block more naturally. The double blocks have likewise been altered to be a bit more accurate. The seam line and the flash have been removed from the outside, and the sheave pins have been ground down flush to the sides of the block body. I've also shaped and drilled out the beckets and straps to be more suitable. And while we're talking about straps and beckets, I should take a moment to address a detail that could easily be overlooked. You'll note that on those two double blocks, the strap is the part that spans nearly the entire width of the block. The becket is offset to one side. In this instance, you can identify the strap because it's the piece that will allow the block to hang plumb. And if you know where the strap is, then you also know which end of the block you should be reeving the line through when it comes time to rig it. Now I point this out because someone might look at the blocks in this photo and they'll see the sheave pin indicated by the red arrow, and thus the sleeves indicated by the green arrow are located above the midpoint of the block, and they should be there. And from that observation one might wrongly assume that the line should be rove through those holes closer to that end of the block, and that would work until it's time to hang the block, because you'd be hanging that block from its off-centered becket. The block would never hang plumb, and the rig would never work correctly. So what does this mean for our double blocks? It means they were cast upside down. The strap and the becket should be opposite of where they actually are. Now the visual impact in this particular case is minimal, and when you look at the photos of the finished throat halyard, you'll see that while it doesn't look 100% correct, it's not really fatal. And I guess the takeaway here is to check everything over carefully. Now, we can really start making stuff. For the throat halyard in this demo, we need two double blocks, one with a strap and a becket, and another with just a strap. Here, I'm working on that second block that just needs the strap. So, first thing we need to do is nip off the unwanted becket. Then next, using a very fine grit sanding disc, I start grinding away at any of the remnants of the becket and try and make it look like there was nothing ever there. I'm also slowly removing the seam lines and the flash from the block, as well as making sure that I've ground down that protruding sheave pin. I don't want anything standing proud of the surface of the block. This needs to be done slowly, because it only takes a second or two to remove too much material and make the block unusable. When I'm satisfied with the way the block looks, I move on to boring out the strap. Here I use a 36 thousandths bit to drill the initial hole. And then I start grinding away at the inside of the strap until I get a consistent shape that I'm satisfied with. Now here you can spend quite a bit of time, and you see me working the drill bit back and forth carefully and slowly, because again, just like with the sanding, a moment's inattention can remove too much material, and you've wasted all that work. But if you haven't wasted the work, and you're satisfied with the way it looks, now you can start buffing it out. And here I'm using a buffing wheel that's very much like a Scotch-Brite pad on a mandrel, and you can get these from Dremel, and they come in a couple of different grits, and they work well. They work well on wood too. And here you see the finished product ready for paint. When it comes to applying paint to cast parts, it's important that you remember this. Whether you use an airbrush to apply your finish or a paintbrush, the success of your paint job is dependent upon two key facts. The first and most important is cleanliness. Paint won't stick to a dirty or greasy surface. Before you paint, soak all your parts in white vinegar for at least a half hour. Longer is better. If, like me, you're usually in more of a hurry, you can use lacquer thinner, acetone, or denatured alcohol. After they've soaked, don't handle them with your fingers. Use tweezers or wear gloves. Dry the parts thoroughly, either just by letting them dry in the air or use a hairdryer. Doesn't matter which. When they're completely dry, I usually put my parts on a toothpick. It makes a convenient handle, and I can stick the freshly painted part into a piece of foam to dry. The second point is to apply the paint sparingly. 3 or 4 coats should be the standard. And if you want your blocks to have the look of natural or oiled wood, apply 2 coats of the base color, and then dry brush the grain color on lightly. If you want to add a bit of age to your blocks, mix a slightly brownish gray wash and give the blocks 1 or 2 coats of this. You should end up with something that looks somewhat like this. Let's take a moment to review what we have and what we still need for this throat halyard. We have our 2 double blocks that have been appropriately prepared. We have a 4-inch thimble left over from the last video. We have a length of line long enough to rig the halyard. We also need to splice a standing end of that line around the thimble. And we need 2 shackles. Now, if this halyard were to be installed on a real model, we would actually need 3 shackles. One to attach the upper block to the mast, another to attach the thimble in the standing end of the line to the bottom of the upper block, and a third to attach the lower block to the gaff. But for this demo, we can get away with 2. And we have our mast with a large eye bolt already installed. So the only thing left to do is make the shackles. We start with a small length of 28 gauge brass wire. I've removed any dirt and grease by running it through a bit of 400 grit paper 2 or 3 times. To blacken it, I use gun bluing. This works well for metal parts for a number of reasons. First, unlike paint, it doesn't add any bulk to the part, so all the detail is preserved. Second, it dries instantly. Third, you can control the color, from a medium dark brown all the way up to full-on matte black. And it's pretty easy to touch up if the need arises. And it probably will. Rather than immersing the wire into the blue, I moisten a small bit of paper towel and then run the wire through it several times until I get the color I'm after. Now, even though I just described how I blacken the wire prior to forming it, you'll notice in this video that I've left it bright. It shows up better that way. We start by forming the first eye. Here is where those special eye forming pliers I spoke of earlier come into play. In the description below, I will include a link to the Nautical Research Guild. They published the Ship Modeler's Shop Notes Volume 1. It's in that book that you'll find the article that details how to make these pliers. So, using the pliers, you start by pushing the standing leg back a bit. About 30 to 40 degrees should do it. This will center the eye on the standing leg. Then you can push the short bit of wire at the front of the pliers around the post to form the eye. Next, I used a 60,000 drill bit as a mandrel to form the U-shape. Once I did that, I can reinstall the first eye back on the post of the pliers. The long piece of excess wire will be hanging out the front. Grab this with a pair of needle nose pliers or anything handy and bring it around the post to form the second eye. Then you can snip off the excess wire and you're nearly done. Remove the shackle from the pliers and check to see if the finish needs to be touched up. Now is also the time to make any adjustments to the legs to ensure that they are the same length or impart the proper shape. But remember, this wire is so soft and malleable you'll probably distort the shackle before it makes it onto the model. So, after installing it, you can make whatever final adjustments are needed. Now the last bit we need to make is the pin. Now this is pretty straightforward, but there are a few steps. So let's get to it. Here I'm starting with a piece of 24 gauge copper wire that gets cleaned and colored just like the brass. Next I take about 1/8 inch of one end of it and I place it squarely in the pliers, and I squeeze the pliers with enough force to flatten the wire. It should look like this. I take about half that flattened length, fold it over on itself, and it should look like this. And finally, I squeeze the flat end until it looks like that. Now, I find it's best to leave the pin very long until it's time to install the shackle on the model. Once everything is where it should be, I cut the end of the pin to protrude just a bit past the shackle and then touch it with a spot of CA glue. And there you have it, making commercially available blocks look a bit more accurate and making shackles from scratch. Now, I was going to include in this video some info on working with wooden blocks that need external stropping, but at more than 17 minutes I think this video is plenty long enough, so I'll save that for the next time, which I promise will be soon. Right now I'd like to say thank you to all of those who have been supporting this channel and to all the folks who have just recently subscribed. It's very encouraging to see the level of interest out there. And as far as future content goes, I'm going to ask your help with that. If you found this video and the way I present the information helpful, please let me know in the comments below. And more importantly, if you were hoping to see me address something here and I didn't, please let me know that too. And don't be afraid to get specific. The videos I post are guided by your input, so keep it coming. If you have any questions about technique or materials or methods, you can contact me through my website, tjloria.com. Just go to the contact page. Feel free to share this video with other members of the ship model community. There are more of us out there than most people think, so let's keep in touch. And remember, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and thanks, and see you soon.